I spotted them before a single fist hit the gate, silhouettes lined up at the edge of their perfect little lawns, trucks idling like predators, boots grinding gravel in slow, hungry steps. Their radios hissed and cracked as if they were gearing up to raid a compound. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't community outreach. This was a takeover. And the moment the first one stepped across my boundary marker, just one boot over the line, something inside me locked into place. I didn't sleep after that. All night I wired the perimeter, posted signs, mounted cameras, calibrated alarms, every inch documented, every angle covered. By sunrise, my farm wasn't just land, it was ready. A quiet fortress built out of preparation and proof. So when they crossed that line again, the world erupted. Floodlights detonated across the field. Alarms howled. Sirens screamed through the morning air. And in that blinding instant, the HOA learned a truth they should have known from the start. Step onto my property, and you don't meet fear. You meet evidence, light, and the full force of the law, all waiting for you. But let me start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're listening from today. My land has been in my family for generations. Quiet, wide, and unmistakably mine. Then the shiny new HOA neighborhood sprouted up beside it like an invasive species. And ever since, the board has acted like my property is some unfinished part of their community vision. They hate that I'm independent. Hate that I don't answer to them. Hate that my land existed long before their rules did. It began with polite letters taped to my gate, invitations written in that overly sweet HOA tone. That's really just a warning dressed up in ribbon. Then the letters turned into registration packets. Then mandatory integration forms. Then thinly veiled threats about joining the community. I ignored all of it, but they didn't stop. HOA members started clustering along my fence line, pretending to take walks while snapping photos of my house. Others dragged measuring wheels across the boundary, whispering to each other, jotting notes like they were surveying property they already claimed. Sometimes I'd look up from the barn and see a cluster of silhouettes standing perfectly still at the edge of their lawns, just watching me. Every week they crept a little closer. Every week the air felt thicker, the silence heavier, the line between my land and theirs more fragile. Something was coming. I could feel it pressing in from the tree line. Slow, inevitable, and planned. The HOA finally snapped, and this time they didn't bother with letters or made-up notices. They came in force. First came the declaration, my land was now an active community threat. No explanation, no authority, just a dramatic label slapped onto property older than their entire neighborhood. Then came the real problem. They hired a private security team, not guards, not professionals. These were men in mismatched tactical gear, radios hissing, boots thudding on the gravel like they were storming a barricade. Black trucks rolled up to my fence line, tires grinding to a halt, in a perfect formation they probably practiced. One of them slammed his fist against my gate. Another lifted a pair of binoculars and stared straight into my windows. A third fiddled with the latch like he had every intention of opening it. Open the gate, or conducting an inspection. You are required to comply. Required by who? Their cosplay committee. Their uniforms weren't official. Their badges weren't real. Their authority was non-existent. But the way they spread out along my fence, scanning, shouting, touching what wasn't theirs, made my pulse spike. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a miscommunication. The HOA wasn't trying to recruit me anymore. They were trying to control me, and they were willing to escalate in ways that had nothing to do with regulations or community harmony. As I watched those trucks idling at my boundary, engines rumbling like a warning, one thing became painfully clear. The HOA had crossed the line. They weren't planning to step back. The HOA's hired muscle didn't just appear once. They settled in like a siege. Every night, their trucks crawled along my fence line, engines rumbling low enough to shake the porch boards.
Our radios popped and hissed.
Floodlights swept across my windows, bleaching the inside of my house in harsh white flashes, like they were checking on an inmate. They leaned against my fence rails with that lazy, arrogant confidence, boots scraping metal, arms folded, eyes fixed on my house for far too long. Every time I stepped outside, they muttered warnings without even looking at me. Stay back. Don't interfere. This is an active patrol zone. Patrol zone. On my land. They weren't securing anything. They were establishing dominance. Then came the night things went from harassment to invasion. I watched one of them lift his boot, step over the boundary marker, and plant it squarely in my soil. He didn't glance down, didn't hesitate. He just smirked, like crossing my property line was some kind of game he'd already won. Another followed, stepping over the line, laughing under his breath, sweeping a spotlight straight onto my porch. The beam blinded me, pinning me in place like prey. That's when I saw them. Behind the security team, several HOA board members stood just beyond the glow, half hidden in the dark. Silent, still watching, approving like this was standard procedure. Like this was theirs now. A cold realization settled in my chest. They weren't going to stop. Not with warnings, not with evidence, not with reason. If I didn't act, and soon they'd take more than my fence line, they'd take my land. I wasn't about to let a group of hired wannabe commandos creep another inch onto my family's land. If they wanted intimidation, then they were about to learn what lawful authority actually looked like. So I got to work. All night, the property buzzed with motion drills, wiring, metal brackets biting into old fence posts. I installed industrial floodlights bright enough to turn midnight into noon. Motion-triggered alarms lined the perimeter, synced 2 cameras that recorded everything with timestamps and location markers. By sunrise, the place looked less like a farm and more like a fortified evidence machine. Every boundary had fresh signs drilled into posts. No trespassing. State-enforced property line. Legal response will be activated. Nothing vague, nothing debatable. Pure, documented, ironclad legality. Before the sun even crested the trees, I drove straight to the sheriff's office. I filed reports. I handed over videos, photos, timestamps, everything. He told me to keep documenting, so I did. When the hired muscle returned that morning, they rolled up the same way they always did. Loud engines, loud mouths, loud confidence. They stepped out of their trucks like they owned the place. Then one of them crossed the sensor line. Instant chaos. Floodlights detonated into full illumination. So bright, they staggered back like someone had punched them in the face with daylight. Sirens blasted from all corners of the field, howling through the air. Cameras swiveled, tracking them like targets on a range. The guards froze, disoriented, hands up against the glare. And over the alarms, over their shouting, over the blinding light, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind them, red and blue lights cutting through everything. They turned. And for the first time since this started, they didn't look confident. They looked caught. Peace didn't drift in slowly. It hit all at once, clean, sharp, absolute. The floodlights stayed dark. The radios stopped crackling. The fence line stood still for the first time in weeks, untouched and unchallenged. It was as if the sheriff's cruiser had drawn a hard border in the dirt, one the HOA suddenly remembered how to respect. Neighbors passed with quiet nods, relief written on their faces. Some gave small, grateful smiles, not the kind that ask for anything, just the kind that say finally. They'd felt the tension too. They'd seen the board's growing arrogance, and they saw who stopped it. The land felt different now. Lighter, like it had been holding its breath, and finally let it go. I walked the perimeter at dusk, checking each sensor, each camera, each line of sight. Everything was in place, humming softly. My own silent network of truth and protection. Weapons, not traps. Just preparation, evidence. And the law standing taller than any intimidation tactic the HOA could dream up. For the first time in a long time, the property felt exactly as it should. Quiet, strong, completely mine. The HOA didn't come back, didn't argue, didn't test boundaries. They'd learned something they'd never forget. You can push a man. You can pressure him. You can try to bully his land. But if you underestimate the owner, you lose. And all that remained now was peace. Real, earned, undeniable peace, settling across my fields like the last light of day.